So, hey, I started a series a couple of weeks ago called The Kingdom, Heart and Soul. Everyone say heart and soul. And partnered up with moving into a new location of building and trusting God with what we have. We want to have that focus, but also there's gonna be a journey that we're working on and we're growing in our faith in God. And so we're looking at the story of a man named Nehemiah, and in his book, it's in the Old Testament. It's an autobiography, and he's sharing the story, and he's not saying that he has bold faith, and he's not making that a statement, but by his story and what we're looking at and we're reading through, this guy had crazy, audacious faith in trusting God. It was ridiculous. And we're going to see that today in some things that he overcame, and one of them is fear. Everyone say fear. And so today we're going to talk about the fantasy of fear. Now, fear, just shows itself in a lot of different places. All of us have it. And I would say this, if you're here and say, I'm not really afraid of anything, you probably have even more that you're afraid of than you realize. But there is fear that creeps into every single one of us. And it's hard to overcome, especially when we're trying to trust God. Trust isn't easy. Now, one thing that my son and I love to do is when summer comes, is that we just love going out into rural type places and look for rivers and lakes that have these high rocks or cliffs you can jump on into the water. Anybody like us, you do that, you've done that. It is so much fun, and so, you almost kill yourself, the whole deal. It's great. And anyway, we go looking for these places, and the one thing happens when you get to these spots and you see other people as they're getting ready to jump these rocks is they kind of run up and look over the edge, and they act like they're going to do it, trying to build up the courage, and then they come back and they stop, and they run up and they stop, and there's something right here. There's something right here that it's hard to get around, and it's hard to get over, it's hard to break through, and it's just in the way, and it stops us. It stops us at those times from the thrill of what we really want. The great expectation and the experience that we want. It's this thing right here, and it's called fear. And we want to break through it. And when it comes to our faith in God and trusting God with our lives in every single area, man, that's a difficult thing to break through because these things just come up. Now, my son, he has a lot more courage than me when it comes to these jumps. He's jumping, climbing up these rocks, and I'm huffing and puffing trying to get up there, and I'm a hot mess. But I'll jump with him. He's not going to outdo me. But there are some things that he's willing to do that I just can't handle, and I can't do. Check this video out, and you can see exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah, show off. Anyway, but he's showing off right there, and he's just doing it in my face, like, hey, try this, and I just won't do it ever. But there is something there's this fear that is there that creeps in when you're trying to trust God. Some of us, it's maybe you haven't been in church in a long time, and it's a big deal. There's this fear to begin to trust a church or trust a pastor or trust Christians. Some of us, there's this fear when you reconcile or go to forgive somebody, you're worried about how it may blow up and not go right. Or what about when God may be challenging you to step out and trust Him in a new way and do something you've never done before, but you're not sure how it's going to turn out, and so you're gun shy, and there's this fear that is there, or you're worried about what people think when you're doing things because this fear is creeping. You've been abused or you've been mistreated when you were younger, and so I don't know that I can get in a vulnerable spot. This fear that is here, and this fear is a fantasy that can ruin and direct our lives without us even thinking about it. But I'm challenging you, and I'm challenging myself, that we would have bold faith. Everyone say bold faith. Now, bold faith, here's the thing about bold faith. It is not something to where when things go wrong, things hit the fan, I got to call Jesus. That's like emergency faith, right? Bold faith is totally different, and we've defined it like this, and I want you to see it on the screen here. It's in your notes. I encourage you to take notes today. But it says this: bold faith is only developed. Everyone say only. Bold faith is only developed when we put ourselves in a vulnerable place and desperately need God to act. We put ourselves there. We don't wait for things to go wrong and then, man, I need God. We just say this: God has nudged me because God's always wanting to do more in my life. So because of that, I'm willing to get in a vulnerable spot to where maybe I don't know the answers. I don't know how. I don't know where, I don't know what, I don't know with who. But because God has put something in my heart, I'm going to put myself in a vulnerable place to where I desperately need God, and God's got to perform a miracle, and I'm going to trust Him. How many of you know this? When you put yourself in a vulnerable place with God, you're going to pray a lot more. You're gonna read the Bible a lot more. You're gonna be going to church a lot more. You're gonna be getting all the Christianese language down. You can do whatever it takes, right? And you are gonna do that because you're in a vulnerable place, and that's bold. That takes courage to say, this is crazy. This just doesn't add up on paper. But because God told me to do it, that's when miracles take place. That's when God does the extraordinary. Extraordinary doesn't just happen when we're waiting for problems to happen and we just cry out to God, though He answers those times. And we're going to look at this story of Nehemiah. It's an autobiography. The book is named after himself, which is Nehemiah. Man, you're sharp. Okay. But it's called Nehemiah. And in this story, this is what's happened. Is you have the city of David, Jerusalem in Israel. You have this city that has been ransacked by another pagan nation. And so Babylon comes in and they take over. They burn down the city. They destroy the temple. They ruin everything. They take a bunch of the people there. They take them as slaves back to their country to serve in their country. And while they're there, they're using them to serve in different ways. And Nehemiah is one of those guys. And God begins to really use and elevate Nehemiah in a great way. To where now he's elevated, he's in the king's court, now he's serving in that realm, and he actually gets to the place to where he is what you would call a cupbearer. A cupbearer is one who is always looking out for the security of the king. It's kind of like high Secret Service. He would make sure that anything he ate or anything he drank, there was no poison at all. And he had this privileged spot. But he hears a report back from his native land how things are still terrible. They're torn down, they're ransacked, people are hurting and people are broken, and it breaks his heart. It hurts his heart to where he finds himself in a place to where now he is praying and asking God to help and just confessing all the sin that anybody has done, that God would just forgive it. And then God takes him to a place to where now he's giving him a mission to do something. And what's interesting is whenever you know God's mission and what God's compelling you to do, positions and titles don't matter anymore. And he was willing to give that up, to be vulnerable with God and say, all right, God, what do you want me to do? And so this prayer of pleading and asking God to help now turns into, God, give me the strength to do what you're telling me to do right now. And then we go into chapter 2, which we're going to read today. And we go into this, and he knows the mission, and then Nehemiah starts doing things that you never, ever do in a kingdom and with a king, and in the conversation and being around him. And so he starts doing these things, and it's like he is putting himself in a vulnerable spot and doesn't realize it, but bold things happen when we have bold faith. And so we're going to look at it. If you look at Nehemiah chapter 2, we're going to read this. It'll be on the screen, or you can look in your, your mobile devices or your Bible if you got the hard copy like me. Come on, somebody. Anyway, I'm a real Christian. Okay. Anyway, sorry. I'm teasing. Y'all need Jesus. All right. In the month of Nisan, which is actually where the Ultima comes from. Kidding. I'm making it up. That's not true. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was before him, I took up the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had not been sad in his presence. And the king said to me, why is your face sad, seeing you are not sick? This is nothing but sadness of heart. Then I was very much afraid. And I said to the king, let the king live forever. Why should not my face be sad when the city, the place of my father's graves, lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire? Then the king said to me, what are you requesting? So I prayed to the God of heaven. And I said to the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, that you send me to Judah, to the city of my father's graves, that I may rebuild it. And the king said to the queen sitting beside him, how long will you be gone, and when will you return? So it pleased the king to send me when I had given him a time. And I said to the king, if it pleases the king, let letters be given me to the governors of the province beyond the river, that they may let me pass through until I come to Judah. And a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the fortress of the temple, and for the wall of the city, and for the house that I shall occupy. I mean, he's just asking and asking and asking, right? And then it says this, and the king granted me what I asked, for the good hand of my God was upon me. All these areas where he had an opportunity to be fearful, it all boiled down to in the end is, but the good hand of the Lord was upon me. And fear wants to come in and wants us to destroy. It wants to destroy this perspective and get us caught up in the fantasy of fear. A couple years after my wife and we got married, we scheduled a vacation to go to Cancun, and I remember the trip down there. We had landed, and we were going to be getting out of the plane, but there wasn't the hallway that attaches to the plane and goes up to the terminal. They didn't have that. They brought out the stairs that they just set against the plane, and you walk out. And I remember as we were walking out in the line, that as we got closer and closer and right to the threshold of the door, all of a sudden the humidity was like whoosh. Everyone say whoosh. That was really spiritual what you just did right now. I want you to know that. But it just came on us, and it was like, oh my gosh, we couldn't believe how strong it was, and it was like suffocating almost, like hard to breathe. I have asthma, and it was like, whoa. And that's what the enemy wants to do to you with your faith. Right when we begin to trust God in a new way or in a new area, in a new direction, he just wants to come and suffocate it and ruin it. To where now you begin to pay attention to the things that are fearful and all the things that we kind of create in our mind or that are there, and we just think it's impossible. And he wants to come and he wants to suffocate it. And it challenges us with this, where the scripture says that God is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we can ask or imagine. That gets challenged right there in that moment, because he wants to suffocate it and he wants us to turn and run. And it all comes from this battle of this fantasy that comes into our lives. In 2 Corinthians, in chapter 10, it says this, and you can look along in your notes or just up here. It says, our battle. Everyone say, our battle. Our battle is to bring down every deceptive fantasy, every lying fantasy, and every imposing defense that men erect against the true knowledge of God. These lying fantasies, what a fantasy is an exaggerated imagination. I don't know about you, but when things become hard and difficult and challenges come, don't we just make them so huge? We just start imagining, and all of a sudden we got a new narrative, and we got things over here. We got people doing things in our minds. We're having conversations with people in our minds. We're going crazy. How many of you say your neighbor's crazy? You got it right? And what happens is this imagination, this fantasy of fear is running wild. And here's what it wants to do, this lying deception, is it wants to ruin your true knowledge of God. Check this now. The enemy wants to use a fantasy to ruin what you know about God. He wants to ruin what you know about God's character and God's love and God's strength and how God is for you and not against you. He wants to ruin that. And so when we get into these times, this fantasy, this fear that is here, you know what we have to do? I've got to get back to knowing God like I've never known Him before. That I'm not going to allow this fantasy to overtake my faith, my bold faith in God. I have to flip fear for faith and grow in Him. I'll say that again. I have to flip faith to grow in Him, right? See, I've messed up the whole flipping thing. Anyway, it was good, I promise. So what we need to do and understand is, it's a time to grow in God. It's not a time to walk away. Let these things, the fear that comes up, let it force you to get closer to Jesus. Yeah. Let it push you in that direction so you don't fall back. Because what happens is we begin to plan our life and direct our life around our fears. That is what drives our decisions and where we go and the plans that we make and how we spend money, what we buy and where we work and who we're around. And this whole thing is guided by fear. And we make it a reality when it's not a reality. It's just emotions and thoughts, deceptive fantasies. And if we were to make it real, like a real living existing thing, I would maybe compare it to a 2-year-old. How many have had 2-year-olds? 2-year-olds are cray-cray. And so say we had this little 2-year-old called fear. This little 2-year-old will keep me up at night. That's what fear does. This little 2-year-old, because it acts up at times, means I can't go out to dinner and be with other people. And sometimes fear, because of what I've gone through, it prevents me from getting closer and having relationships with other people. Hello? And because I've got fear, it can take away, this little 2-year-old can take away God's plans for my life because I'm paying too much attention to this and what people think about me instead of stepping out and saying, God, I'm going to do what you want me to do, and I'm going to trust you with the fear in my life anyways, and I'm going to have faith. It's this 2-year-old, it's this fear we're trying to manage, and we have to get control of it or it'll control us and it'll decimate our faith, and we certainly won't have a bold faith. It's like, if you were to ask me if I'm afraid of, when I go to get vaccines and getting shots, my natural response is going to be, no, I'm not afraid of them at all. When the truth of the matter is, when I start taking some inventory and evaluating deep down, I'm like, I'm a little bit nervous before I go up and get a shot. How many of you know what I'm talking about? Right? Those of you who didn't raise your hand, you're sick. You really are, that you're cool with someone pricking you with a needle, right? But when I go in there, and I get the shot, here's the difference. I may have fear, but the fear hasn't controlled me because I know that what I'm getting is more important for me in the end. And I control the fear, though it may show up and it may be a fantasy, it is not going to become a reality and dictate the direction of what I'm doing. And bold faith says, I'm putting myself out there and I'm going to be vulnerable, and I'm going to trust God, and I'm going to allow God to dictate the course and the direction of my life, and not these imaginations and these fantasies of fears. Are you following me this morning? And so what we're going to do is we're going to point out a few things, because I just think Nehemiah in this area in his life, in this occurrence, I just think he is dope in the faith that he has. And we're going to see some things that how he handles fear, how he gets around it, so that he has this bold faith and he lives it out. And so there's some things I really want you to take down these notes, because I think it's really going to hit you in a personal way. And the first thing with fear is, if we don't manage it and if we don't take hold of it and we don't control it, is fear will make you force things. Fear will make you force things in life. There was a 4-month gap between when he found out the news of what was happening. There was 4 months until he actually had this conversation with King Artaxerxes. And then if you see down further in the story, it talks about all of the things that he was requesting and all the plans and how much time he needed and the whole deal. And I believe this is because those 4 months were times of planning. They were times of thinking through. There are times of prayer. There are times of maybe getting advice on how he was going to tackle this, and when the time came to talk to the king to be able to present this before him. And sometimes, though, with us, with fear, we just rush it and we jump right into it. And I'll tell you why. It's because we have a fear that it's going to be too late and we're going to miss the opportunity. We have FOMO, fear of missing out. We really do. We really do. If you're single and you're waiting for that spouse, and it's like, I'm on a time clock here and I'm waiting, and maybe since I haven't seen God's person, maybe I can get this one to be that person. And so we try to force them to be something they're not. Or we have a deal that needs to be made, and so we start making exceptions and we just push it through, and we end up making a bad decision in the end. Or because we want to pursue something, we're willing to go ahead and cut some corners in character so we can have what we want, and it blows up in our face. Because we're trying to force, maybe we have a calling or a ministry issue and we're just trying to push through, and it seems like doors keep shutting. Because we're trying to force things, and so many times that can happen because we're fearful instead of waiting for God's timing, which so many times, don't we just think God's timing stinks? I mean, man, I don't know if God liked that you just said that right now. Anyway, but it's a difficult thing to wait for in God's timing. But fear will make you force things. Another thing that fear will make you do is fear will make you stress. How many of you have ever had some stress before? I know not many, right? But fear will make you stress. He's going into the king's courts, and he is sad. The pressure is there, and the king notices and says, wait a minute, I know you're not sick. There's something going on deeper here. Now, I'm going to tell you something why this could be such a fearful thing is when, in those times, if you were a servant in the king's courts or in his presence, you did not go in there sick. You did not go in there showing any type of attitude or depression or discouragement. You went in on a positive note. And if you went in with that kind of mentality, or you came in with some type of disappointment or whatever, you could be in big trouble. But here is Nehemiah, and he goes in, and he's got the stress on him, and he pushes through. But it's heavy and it's weighing on him. And I'm going to tell you why we get stressed a lot of times. Is because we want things, we're afraid of things not working out the way they should. We get afraid that things are going to fall apart. So what happens is we get anxiety. And we have this anxiety that builds up. And anxiety actually can make you physically sick. It can give you nausea. It can give you headaches. It can make your muscles ache. That happens, and anxiety can come in because we're worried about things that are falling apart, and so we're trying to pull everything together. And over the last, 6 months or so, I just really came to terms with and just felt like the Lord was really showing me areas where, you got some anxiety. And the scriptures say be anxious for nothing, but you're anxious. You got some anxiety, and it's hard for me to accept because I'm this type of person that, I get things done. I execute. I'm not afraid to climb the hill, and I'll do that or whatever. But then the Holy Spirit just began to kind of maybe point out some things. Well, it's the anxiety that's making you like that. Because you're afraid that things are going to fall apart. It's going to be a mess. And you're stressed out. And that's something that we have to come to terms with. There's a fear element that is there, and it'll bring stress into our lives if we don't control this fantasy of fear. And Nehemiah was in there, and he was in that stress, and he went through that zone, but he still maintained his bold faith until what we can see happen as well is if we give in to fear, is that fear will make you panic. Fear will make you panic. I like this. The king points out, obviously now he could be in potential trouble. The king has spotted, you got some issues in your heart right now, and there's a problem. And he points it out, and so now it's like, okay, everything's on the table, and I could be in really big trouble. And then he says this, and I was so much afraid. He doesn't try to act like there isn't fear. He's recognizing, I am scared. I made that up. I am scared. I am afraid. You call it what you want. He was trembling. And there was fear that was there. It was kind of like, oh crap, what did I just do? Are you kidding me? What if God doesn't come through on this one? Have you ever been there to where you're kind of like, I'm stepping out and I feel like I'm moving in that direction and things fall apart and like, maybe I missed God. Maybe that wasn't God talking to me, or maybe it was just bad pizza or a burrito or something. I don't know what it was. And you and I have been in those moments where it's been, oh crap, and then what do we do? We start looking at ourselves. I wonder if I look like an idiot, and we get insecure. And we start having self-doubt and even maybe loathing, and we're getting on ourselves and upset because, I don't know that this came together. It was right like it should have been, and it's my fault. And we get into those oh crap moments to where fear just rushes us, and that's what was happening here with Nehemiah. But Nehemiah didn't quit. Nehemiah didn't stay there. And it's interesting what he did here after the king notices, and he says that he prayed. The king starts answering him and talking with him. And then he asks him what he needs from him, like, how long is it going to take, etc. And then it says something real key. Nehemiah says, so I prayed to the God of heaven. So I pray to the God of heaven. I can't do this. I just got to lay it at his feet. I pray to the God of heaven because fear will make you controlling. Fear will make you controlling to where you try to control situations. Watch this. You try to control people. You try to control your kids. You try to control their decisions. You try to control your boss, your spouse. You try to control environments. And it comes from this place of it's got to be just right. It's got to be the way I want. And if it's not that way, man, I got to make this happen. I'm going to be on this, and I'm going to be on this. And you're upset and you're mad because you're trying to control something. And you know, it was a few months ago I was listening to a message on fear, and I really felt like the Lord just said, you don't control anything. We're afraid of things getting out of control. And God's like, yeah, right, it's out of your control. And here Nehemiah just knew this is out of control. So I prayed to the God of heaven that, God, I need you to do this. And we go to a God who has everything in control. Even when we're uncertain and we don't know how it's going to work out, God has everything in control. The course of our country, the course of your home, the course of our city, the course of your job. God has everything under control. In the book of Proverbs, it says this, that He directs the heart of a king like a water course. He directs it. That means He can take a heart and change it for His good and His purpose. And all we have to do is pray to Him and say, God, I don't know how this is going to work out, but I put it at your feet. That's what we do. But I don't let it take me away from being vulnerable with God to see miracles happen in my life. That's what happens when we see a couple little kids playing. One takes a toy from the other one. Give me. No, mine. And they go back and forth. And finally one of them just says, well, I'm gonna tell. Well, I hit you, man. You guys are violent. We got anger management after this. Oh, my Lord. Dude, you can take the girl out of the hood, but you can't. Never mind. But look, we tell on the other. That's what we're telling. Let's start telling God on our problems. Let's start going to Him and say, God, I don't know how this is going to work out. I just want things to work out the way you want them to work out. And we allow Him to take control. And Nehemiah knew, I need the God of heaven on this one. This is all in His plans. And then he does the unthinkable. He's like trembling. He's afraid. He's praying. And then he rambles off this list of all these things he needs. He tells them let me tell you how much time I'm going to go on vacation for, King. I'm going to be gone quite a while, and then he says, oh, by the way, I need some letters to be able to let through, and I need a letter for supplies, and, I need a letter to make sure I have enough to build the temple. I need letters to be able to build enough, build my house where I'm going to live, and he keeps asking and asking and asking and going with what he had already planned on doing. See, fear sometimes will make you withdraw. Fear will make you withdraw to where you know what needs to be done, but because fear is kicking in, you just step back and you shrink back. That maybe God is telling you need to share your testimony with someone else, but the fear kicks in and you just begin to shrink back and you just say, hey, I go to church. Or maybe it is about giving a pledge like we've talked about and making a commitment to some extent. And so, we're making that financial commitment, but it's like, but I don't know if I can. And so we just start and then we pull back. Or we know that we need to go and reconcile and forgive somebody. And we just send a text, hey, how are you doing? And we don't go fully in because we're afraid of how things are going to turn out. And we just don't know that we can go there because things could fall apart. And so we miss living the life and experiencing the miracles that God has planned, and we withdraw and we pull back. And I want to say this is really important, and I say this from a sincere place, is right now our church is being attacked in a physical way. We have numerous people that are finding out that they have cancer in a variety of ways. And it's more than I can count. It's almost up to 2 hands that I can count. And I want to say this. I'm speaking to those who are sick, or some of you may have some real, tough illnesses and things you're going through right now. I want to say this, and I say this with love, and I know this is from the Holy Spirit, because I know that Nehemiah didn't flinch. He kept going. And I want to say this. Don't you flinch. Don't you stop living the life that God has already determined for you to live. No cancer can stop the work of God. And He wants to perform miracles in your life. And don't you slow down. Don't you let up. Don't you withdraw. You keep pushing forward and say, God, what do you have next? I want your blessings on my life. It doesn't matter what's happening in this vessel. It's all about what's on the inside and your will happening. And I don't say that to be shallow. I say that to be intentional, that God's not done. If we're not dead, God's not done. And that's a fact for every single one of us. And here's what happens here is Nehemiah. He's gone through these requests, and it says this, that the king granted him his requests. The king says, fine, you got everything you want. And the response is so powerful to me to what Nehemiah says. He says, and the good hand of the Lord was upon me. The good hand of my God was upon me. Saying this king didn't do it on his own. This was God. I didn't do it on my own. I'm not all that. I didn't have all the great words. This was God, and it's because His hand is on my life. I was fearful, but because His hand was on my life and on me, I did it afraid, and I didn't get held back. And what a powerful thing to know that the hand of God is on you. I want to have Titus come up. I think he's in the back there. Is he back there? He better go get him. He's supposed to help me out right now. And he's in trouble. I'm going to give him a whooping in front of everybody. Anyway, no, I'm kidding. But I want you to see this. Is that there he is. That's what you get for busting out, dude. I got you right now. Come on up here. Come here. But I want you to see this. And the worship team can come on in. I want you to see this. All right, that's enough. Okay. Anyway. But I want you to see this here. This is what it's like when we're going through fearful things. Is the enemy is really trying to shake us. He's got this fantasy. And this is the kind of thing that he's doing and disrupting our life. He's just kind of going like this. I couldn't wait to do this. That's why I wanted him in here so bad. But the enemy is he's just messing with us, right? And he's taunting us. And he's painting these pictures. And he's given them to us. And we know God's put something in here. But when after we've heard from God, or God's compelled us, or God's moving us in another direction, the enemy just starts coming like this, and he starts putting fear in us and trying to mess us up and keep us away from the will of God. And this is all we need in those times. Is I just want in those times where I'm shaken and I'm rattled and fear is creeping in, I just want to have, God, if you just put your hand on me right now. That everything is falling around, but I just need the good hand of my God upon me in my life. That I just need to know His presence is real, that He hasn't left me, He hasn't deserted me. I may be going through it, but He is there and He calms me. And sometimes we get away and we're not from that hand, and we need to come right back to that hand and say, God, would you just put your hand on my life? And see, in the Old Testament, when it talks about the hand, when it's talking about how it's weighty and it's mighty, that from the hand of God we have His strength, we have His concern, and we have His direction in our life. To where when I'm going through difficulties, man, God, I just need your hand on me. God, I just want to know you're with me through the trial and the suffering. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And we read scriptures like 2 Timothy that says, for He has not given me a spirit of fear, but a power, love, and a sound mind. Amen. That when I am weak, He is strong. I just need His hand. That when I feel hopeless and insecure and I'm wandering, His love hasn't gone anywhere. When I feel like I don't know if I can make the next step, I am resolute and I am determined with a sound mind to follow Jesus, to follow the Lord's plans. For all the days of my life, I need His hand upon me. That's what I need. That's what you need. And this fantasy thing, it's a mirage. It's not reality. What reality is that I have God's hand on my life and I'm moving forward in Him. Here's what I want to do today. Don't you go anywhere. I'm not through with you. Would you stand with me this morning?